They came from the sea, 120 ships, black sails like wings of ravens slicing through the mist of the river Seine. No warning, no mercy. Only the sound of drums, oars, and the screams of villages swallowed by fire. In the year 845 AD, the heart of Francia trembled. The Vikings were no longer raiders on the edges of the map. They were predators at the gates of Paris itself. But this wasn't just a raid. It was a message, carved in smoke, silver, and blood. Because on that day, a Viking warlord, said to be Ragnar Lodbrok himself, forced a king to his knees. And the ransom he demanded would haunt the Frankish crown for generations. If you want to know a band of pagans humiliated one of Europe's mightiest kings, stay till the end. The secret lies not only in what they conquered, but how easily they made the world bow. Before the flames reached Paris, West Francia was already burning from within. King Charles the Bald, grandson of Charlemagne, ruled over a fractured kingdom. Nobles fought nobles. The church bled money, and the rivers, once symbols of trade and faith, became highways for death. The Franks had grown soft behind their walls of gold and prayer. They believed faith could protect them. But faith does not stop an axe. Out of the northern seas came rumors, ships seen near Rouen, monks slaughtered in monasteries, strange men speaking in tongues that sounded like thunder. By the time the Frankish scouts reached the palace, it was too late. The storm had already entered the Seine. And at its head, a man the chronicles called Regin Harry. Others whispered another name, Ragnar Lodbrok. But was it really him, or a ghost wearing his legend? That's the first mystery of Paris. Imagine standing on the banks of the Seine. You hear them before you see them. The rhythm of hundreds of oars, the low chant of men who've seen gods die in battle. 120 longships surged upriver, carrying over 5,000 Viking warriors. They moved like a serpent, the head already in Rouen, the tail still in the sea. Villages burned as they passed. Churches were stripped of their relics, and the Franks watched helplessly. Because the Seine, their sacred artery, was now a Viking highway. The invaders didn't stop. They wanted something bigger, the crown jewel of West Francia, Paris. When they reached the city's gates, Easter was approaching, but there would be no resurrection for Paris, only judgment. Paris, in 845 AD, was little more than a fortified island, Ile de la Cité, surrounded by a scattering of wooden defenses. No great walls yet, no towers of Notre Dame, just faith and fear. As the Viking ships appeared on the horizon, bells tolled frantically. Citizens ran across bridges, clutching their children and relics, hiding inside churches that soon would not stand. The Franks tried to form a defense, but the Vikings landed before dawn. Their axes cut through men and shields alike. The air was thick with smoke and prayer. They captured the bridge, took hostages, and marched into the heart of the city. Paris, the crown of the Franks, fell within a single day. And then, something even darker began. The Norse didn't want the city destroyed. Not yet. They wanted its soul sold. Charles the Bald was desperate. He'd gathered an army to defend Paris. But when the two sides clashed near the Seine, the Frankish lines broke like glass. His men fled. Some were captured. Others were executed. Their bodies hung on the riverbanks, one for every cross they had carried. The message was clear. God will not save you. So the king did what kings were never supposed to do. He begged. Through envoys, he offered a ransom, 7,000 pounds of silver and gold. A fortune that could buy loyalty across continents. When the Viking chieftain accepted, Paris was spared, but humiliated. The Northmen sailed away, their ships heavy with treasure. But as the Frankish court watched the fleet disappear down the Seine, one question lingered. Would they return? The answer came decades later. With fire, even the king could not buy his way out of. But before we reach that part of the story, take a moment. If you're drawn to the forgotten wars and dark bargains that shaped empires, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every week, we uncover another moment history tried to bury, and the truths empires feared we'd remember. Now, back to the Vikings, because their victory over Paris wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The Siege of 845 wasn't just a victory, it was a prophecy. The Vikings had discovered something extraordinary, that the greatest kingdoms in Europe could be bought. That gold, not God, ruled men. This was the first recorded Viking attack on Paris, and it shattered the illusion of safety in the Frankish world. It showed that no river, no border, no wall could stop them. Soon, other warbands followed the path of Ragnar, using the Seine, the Loire, and the Rhine as doorways into Christendom. By the end of the century, France itself would be reshaped by the same bloodline of men who once burned its churches. But that future was already taking root, in the ashes left behind. When the Vikings withdrew, they left a ghost city. Half of Paris had been stripped bare, monasteries looted, priests executed. The ransom had drained the treasury, forcing Charles to tax his own people heavily. Resentment grew. So did fear. Every mist that rolled across the river made Parisians think the Northmen had returned. And in a way, they had. Because from that moment on, the Vikings became more than invaders. They became a shadow empire, feeding on tribute, manipulating kings, setting the terms of peace with the edge of an axe. Ragnar himself vanished into legend. Some said he died soon after from plague. Others swore he sailed home to Denmark, his treasure glinting like the eyes of Odin. But whether he was man or myth, his legacy was undeniable. He had shown that fear could conquer faster than steel. And yet, the Frankish court didn't learn. Their weakness would invite something worse, the Second Siege of Paris, 40 years later. But that's a story for another night. To understand why the Vikings succeeded, you have to understand their weapon, the river. Their longships were engineering miracles, light enough to be carried across land, yet strong enough to cross oceans. They could strike from anywhere, disappear upstream, and return before word even spread. Paris was doomed the moment those ships entered the Seine. The Frankish defenses were built for land wars, not ghosts that sailed on water. While the Franks prayed in stone cathedrals, the Vikings listened to the tide. They didn't just fight the enemy, they fought the map itself, and won. This mastery of movement turned the Norsemen into something more terrifying than barbarians. They became a system, a formula for chaos that Europe could never unlearn. And every time a new fleet appeared, kings remembered. The ransom of 845 wasn't payment, it was permission. The chronicles tell of monks crucified on church doors, of corpses floating down the Seine, of prayers echoing through burned chapels. But behind the horror lies something quieter, the sound of faith breaking. Imagine being a child in Paris that day. The bells stop ringing, the sky turns black. You see men who don't speak your language dragging crosses out of the cathedral, melting chalices for silver. And you realize the gods you were told to trust are gone. The Frankish world saw the Vikings as demons, but to the Norse it was divine justice. If their gods were dead, then gold was holy, and Paris was their temple. That day, the River Seine didn't just carry ships, it carried the soul of a kingdom down into darkness. History repeats itself, not because we forget it, but because we refuse to believe it could happen again. The Siege of Paris was a mirror. It reflected what happens when arrogance blinds empires, when power becomes complacency, when kings believe fear has a price tag. The Vikings understood something timeless, that fear, once planted, grows faster than armies, and the easiest way to conquer a nation is to make it buy its own survival. So when you look at modern cities built along rivers, gleaming with glass instead of stone, remember this: Paris was once a burning island surrounded by blood. And every empire, no matter how civilized, can drown if it forgets how fragile it is. When the Vikings finally vanished beyond the horizon, Paris lay still. The smoke cleared. The bells began to ring again, not in celebration, but in surrender. The ransom had saved the city, but at a cost that would echo through centuries. The Vikings had proved that even kings could kneel, and from that day forward, Europe would never again feel safe behind its walls. This was not just a siege, it was the day civilization paid tribute to chaos. If you found this story haunting, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Not for the Franks, but for the ghosts of history we bring back every week. And when the next video appears on your screen, click it. Because next time, we'll uncover another story of betrayal, blood, and the dark bargains that shape the world you live in today.